Hey, everybody. Thanks for joining us today on Analytics Stories. I've got Gary Gruccio with me from Signet Jewelers. And Gary, thanks so much for being with us today.
Oh, you're welcome. It's great to be here, Lee.
So you're going to really like this conversation. I got to tell you a little bit about Gary. So just full disclosure, Signet's actually been a client of mine, but Gary and I have become friends because we share a common love of sports and football, and he's a huge Browns fan. So we're going to talk about that in a little bit. But just to give you a little bit of the rundown on Gary, he grew up in Ohio and he's living there still with his wife and kids. And like many of us, he's got a passion for data, and in particular, he's skilled in geospatial data, which is actually not very common among us. You know, if you can use a map in software like I can, I wouldn't call myself very skilled at geospatial data. I think it's quite different. And he's got a BA and an MS in geography from the University of Akron, so that's pretty impressive in this. And he started his career as a geographer, so you don't find too many of those. For the Census Bureau, I've actually got a cousin who's been a cartographer since before they had computers, so that's a whole other thing. And after there, he returned back to Ohio from Detroit to Signet, and he was still working on geospatial data, but he's worked with marketing teams, the real estate teams, which we're going to get into, and he's working in a new group called Enterprise Analytics. And in addition to Tableau, he worked with Alteryx. He's actually an Alteryx ace and an Alteryx visionary, and he's on the Tableau Speaker Bureau. So we're real lucky to have him today. He knows a lot about data. Or we can just jump right in and get to it.
No, I think it's good. It's just a pleasure to be here, Lee.
Yeah, awesome. So now, having worked with you at Signet, I know that you have a lot of different groups as customers. And you know, you're working with management teams and at a lot of different levels. And you know, one of the issues that I see out there a lot is when you're working with analytics, it's very, in visuals especially, it's very easy to have people get distracted, right, with different types of content on a dashboard. So I'm wondering if you have any tips, and whether it's not just about, you know, I know you work with Tableau a lot, but don't limit this to a Tableau discussion. Just in general, from what you've seen in your career, when it comes to displaying data, is there something that you could recommend to our listeners to say, you know, avoid doing this because it will save you a lot of trouble?
Yeah. So some of the things that I've seen are that people tend to try to answer too many questions with one dashboard or too many questions with one report or spreadsheet. So it's like a dashboard that's the be-all, end-all dashboard that's supposed to answer everything about a person's business or maybe the entire business, and there's really no focus. So there's really no message, and maybe the person who dreamed it up or maybe the person who put it together is the only person that really truly understands what's going on there. And I see a lot of dashboards that simply, they would resemble what would be like an Excel document, maybe an Excel document on steroids, where there's really no focus. There's just like a bunch of tables arranged together, and that they use it more for a querying tool. Like all of the data is centrally stored somewhere, but then they're using Tableau as a front end to filter and query the data that they then extract into a CSV or an Excel file and dump into Excel to do their analytics, where you've got this powerful visual tool. Why aren't you using it like in its native state? But there are many people that do that. So I think it's really just like the focus. If there's no focus on the dashboard, what message is it trying to convey? But rather, it's almost being used as a query tool or a repository when it should not be.
Yeah, I really glad you brought that up, because that drives me crazy. I call that the one size fits none issue, right? It's like you think it's actually supposed to do everything for everybody, but then it ends up doing nothing for everybody. So do you think that that's something, is that driven by the people who are actually building the dashboards, or do you think that that's like a management or the customer saying, oh, just throw it all on there, or kind of, what do you see?
Yeah, many times I think it is the management, the people who are giving direction are saying like, I want a dashboard that does this and this and this and this for me. And many times the people that they've worked with on the construction of the dashboard, they've just been used to producing things the old way. Sometimes things have been the same report for the last 15 to 20 years. So it's just like they're thinking about, well, how can I recreate what I normally do in Excel? And I'll build it into this dashboarding software. But many times it's sort of directive, and then often people will say, "This is what I'm asking you for," and then once they get it, they'll say, "Well, it doesn't really answer all my questions, or it's not really what I wanted." But I think that a lot of it is sort of dictated. Like I'm used to getting it in this format, and they're not really challenging the norms and saying like, what is actually possible with the different step up in tools and its capability is so different and so interactive.
Yeah, I see that happening when, like you were describing, it basically becomes like an access point into some database, which in some ways is good because maybe the organization never had access to it, right? Because either it was in the confines of one group, maybe in IT, that was doing that, or you had to have special skills. Maybe you could do it, but if you didn't know SQL or something like that, or some other language, you weren't going to be able to do that. So it's actually a boost to the organization to have that. And I think what happens is a lot of times they think that's a huge win. Like, oh, now we have all this data. And even if they just pump it back into Excel to do the analysis, they're like, well, I never even had it before. So, and if they don't really have somebody pushing them into that, like you're saying, kind of looking at how they could do things differently, or they're just resistant to it. They're happy with that, getting to that point.
Yeah, exactly. And many times it's maybe 10 times better than what they've been doing in the past, but there's really no, there's not really the efficiency that they could be gaining from it if they were truly answering the questions, right? Not taking it the final step and knowing that it could really just give them an instant read on what they're actually asking about.
Yeah. So if you've seen that happening at your place, is there anything that you've done or other people have done to try to move the needle a bit, get them off of that, hey, let's not just jam it all in here. Let's try to find a way to break it up or not make it a query tool. What are some things we could do to take a step in that direction?
Well, I think some of the things that we learned in your course were getting to the true business question, right? And understanding what is actually going to be actionable. The idea of what business question am I asking? And then what are the best ways to display the data in such a way that it answers those questions, starting with the most important attributes and then working your way down to ones that maybe don't even make it on the page anymore. They may be nice to knows, or maybe they belong on another page or another dashboard completely. Yeah. There's this whole work process that you should have like an iteration with the management team to see, would this answer your question? If I was able to produce something like this, does this answer the question? And I think that what we try to do, we have these quarterly meetings with our analytic teams, and we try to show, from time to time, best-in-class dashboards, or some of the ones that we've done. I don't know if you'd call them best-in-class, but it's almost like this is what's possible. How does that compare to maybe what you're doing today? And if you would like to get to where some of these dashboards are, here are some people that you can talk to internally as internal resources that can work with you, train you on the use of the software to kind of get to that point.
That's smart. So it's like you're giving them a showcase to at least expose them to some other ideas. And even if they don't react maybe immediately and say, oh yeah, that's exactly what I want, maybe it plants a seed in them and there's a discussion to be had after that. I think that's pretty good, because I think also, like you said, you might be showing them things that are way better than what you're doing, but you're not afraid to do that, right? You're saying, hey, okay, well, we're doing this and we're all working towards something better. So I think a lot of organizations are afraid to do that, like to make themselves, I'll say, vulnerable for maybe criticism or something like, well, why can't you do that?
Sure.
Kind of a response, or why don't we have that already? So
exactly. And we are a team that really kind of like picked this up organically. Like, this is something that we decided inside our department. We wanted to make sure that we were really, understanding the right way to do things, and then it actually pushed out from our department to company wide. So it's it's something that we saw the initial need for from a departmental standpoint, and I think maybe in some ways that's maybe a better approach, or I don't want to say better, but maybe a different approach than if it's top down and being like forced on the businesses. Like, here's a tool, you're going to use it. We came at it from the standpoint of, here's a tool, we think you're going to get value from it. We're going to provide it for you, and you get to use it. Almost like it's a positive rather than you're stuck. Hey, here's a tool that we've purchased and you're stuck with it.
Yeah, and in the end, as much as I love things like Tableau and Alteryx, and most people don't care about that. They just care about what's in it for me, right? It's not that they're selfish. It's just like, yeah, I don't care about what you're doing, as long as it helps me get my job done better, faster, makes me look smarter to my management, right? Whatever they're trying to accomplish, and you can help them do that. That's what they care about. So actually, I think that's a great segue to another thing I wanted to talk to you about, because I know this was really big for you guys. So one thing that we didn't say in the beginning, so Signet, if you're not familiar with it, is a parent company, and you're probably very familiar with their brands: Zales, Kay, Jared, Piercing Pagoda. I mean, these are all companies that operate under Signet. So we all know them. And when COVID hit, I know that was a big thing, because a lot of your operations, a lot of your stores are inside of places like malls. And of course, those environments just, pretty much got shut down. And I know you were doing a lot of work to make sure your employees were safe, your customers were safe. And then when you were opening back up, I know that, there was a lot of work you did to, figure out not only what stores were opening up, but, how would you do that safely, right? It's that's a paramount thing. So I know that's important for everybody who needed to get jewelry in that time, and the e-commerce and all that. But I imagine with all of those things going on, it had to be pretty rough, at times, maybe professionally, personally, a lot of things that went on through that, and the company's doing well, which is good, and I know it hit a stock high. So having said all that, can you tell us a story about what was going on during COVID, or maybe some other time, but I think COVID would be interesting, where, you were analyzing the data, looking at it, but the story maybe wasn't such a great story, and you were uncomfortable, and it was going to make other people uncomfortable. Can you walk us through that situation and how you got through it? Because I think that's just probably, a lot of people have probably gone through that over the last year, where there's just a lot of negative information and they had to deal with it.
Yeah, actually, the one that comes to mind, it made me feel uncomfortable. It was more of a positive story. So once we began opening stores, I had this perception that it was going to take a long time before we got back to profitability, before our stores were performing well again, and this kind of thing. And we initially saw strength in the store openings that were actually, we were doing fairly well. And the data would lead towards us predict. We actually, one of our responsibilities within our department is predicting sales going forward, like actually running time series models. We have a whole way of producing this and putting it into Tableau, and you can look at historical data and then the data for future or forecasting, where the consumer was showing enough strength that we were predicting a strong holiday performance. And it was going against the grain. The finance department had, their expertise. They'd worked in forecasting for many, many years, and they were seeing, what they were seeing, a different set of numbers. And so the uncomfortable part of it was being so far apart, saying that we were going to have a strong holiday season and being in a position to try to defend that. in the face of what we were, hearing from our team members in other departments and in finance. And we were coming at it from a standpoint of, hey, if the consumer is showing us that they're willing to come back and shop with us, whether it's online or in the stores or a combination of both, that we need to be in a position to buy enough advertising and buy enough merchandise and make sure that we're not that we have enough staff in our stores and these kinds of things. Given all the challenges that you had with COVID, there was just like, especially showing us with the store performance, not just the e-com, but the store performance was going to be relatively strong. And we're talking about in August and September. What we had to do, how do we handle it? It was just like a month-to-month review, getting in front of the finance team, talking about what we just saw in the previous month. And then the uncomfortable part of it too is trying to explain why is it happening. The best that, initially what I was seeing in the data, we had this big concern not only about the COVID, but the unemployment rate and how the two were related. But we were actually seeing where the unemployment rates were higher, we were getting stronger sales. And
wow, that's super interesting.
I can only attribute that to being that there was the initial government stimulus money, and there was the additional money that was being paid to people beyond their traditional unemployment benefits that potentially was providing a lift where, shopping is at least is an activity, right? It's, something kind of gets you out of the house or, it makes you feel good when you get something. And then there's also the potential impact to other categories. Travel, concerts, sporting events, all these things that are sort of off the table that people potentially were spending their money to buy tangible items instead of being able to participate in events, the kind of normal things that they would have done. And then lastly, maybe it was more of a focus on relationships. People saying like, I never realized how important you were to me. Let's get married. And so, there could have been like several things that were affecting it. But at the time, it's just, a lot of theory, and you're trying to say, how do we bridge this divide? And in the end, our performance was really strong. I know you can look at our second quarter and third quarter results. We just produced holiday results as well. But we had a fairly close result that was close to what we had predicted.
That's amazing. Yeah. So first of all, like you said, great story with some there's some conflict in there. Was there anything else besides, doing a good job of presenting the information, having that kind of constant and open communication between the teams? Was there anything else in particular that you found effective? Was there a certain way you presented the information, or was it just kind of like everybody just got on board and because there had to be a turning point, right? Where finance went more in your direction. So what was it that did that for them? Or do you even know?
Well, I think it was just the performance was actually showing its strength in each month. So once you got into September and then October and those kind of things, I think that it was showing that it was actually aligned with what we were projecting. We have had a dashboard in place for a little over a year, so the process was very well kind of proliferated so that people could go in and then look at this dashboard and answer their questions. But we were able to give the metrics showing where we think the forecast is going, where the sales are actually trending, what the prediction was from the finance team, and then update that constantly, but with different queries. So you could see it by brand, or you could see it by just by month, by week, all different ways that you would normally look at a forecast. And some brands were, they had a different perspective. They were aligned with us, but many of the discussions we had were related to that, how the lines were different. But the dashboard often would serve as the central discussion point, whether we would put they would lift the image and put it into the senior leadership updates that were happening with the senior leadership team. as well as it became like a focal point for the discussions that we were having for the with the different finance teams.
Interesting. So actually, I'm going to try to tie an analysis I was doing with something you said. So as you're saying, as the performance was getting better, that's what turned the tide. And is that when they also decided to give you more money for advertising? I'm gonna tell you why I asked that question.
I'm not sure what the reaction was. Like at the end of the day, I don't know how the spending was affected. I don't know in terms of the merchandise. I mean, I assume everything was aligned because of the way our stores ended up performing in the end. But yeah, it's a good question. I don't know myself.
But here's why I ask. I remember there was a point. I don't know if it was exactly the timing of it, but I'm going to call it November-ish. And there was just a slew of advertising from your companies on TV. And I was like, and of course, because we've worked together, I'm just a little bit more tuned into it. And I was just like, wow, they are just cranking out commercials. And it was just, so maybe there was some timing in there that, based on what you were saying was going on, that got them to, because it was clear. I mean, it was just like so many commercials, but in a good way. So I think there's a good lesson in that about, finding ways to keep things going and having that open communications in that kind of a situation. So and kind of how you went about it, I think was really interesting. So let's get to the important stuff here. Let's talk about the Browns. I know that's yeah. So I mentioned that Gary was a big Browns fan. And so, of course, if you've been following football, the Browns made it into the playoffs for the first time in, I think, 25 years. So that's been a good thing. And I remember him even texting me if he was at the game where they clinched their playoff spot. So now, here's some role playing. So, Gary, imagine that you are Baker Mayfield, who, again, if you're not sure, he's the Browns quarterback. And it turns out not only are you good with football, you're amazing with data. And you've been asked to teach a clinic to a group of data visualization rookies. All right. So get into character here. So what's the one thing that you are going to drill into them over and over until they've got it down? So think about this as, the most important thing that you want them to take away as working in data visualization that they're going to be able to use to really build their careers.
Well, I think if you look at Baker Mayfield's performance over the last 3 years, he's definitely improved, right? And I think that part of that is going out prepared. Rather than going out and relying on talent so much, it's knowing the talent is there, but also having a game plan. Right. And I think that for everybody who's working in data visualization and analytics, you need to have the game plan. And we alluded to it a little bit before, but the idea is that rather than just diving right into a project or just answering the question you've been asked initially, it's the sitting down with the leadership and beginning a storyboarding process that happens on paper rather than on your desktop. The idea of laying out. These are the questions that are probably, and these are some of the answers I can provide, and determining which are the best. And I think the idea is that if you can get to there fast, in the start, maybe when you're starting your career or starting the process of picking up visualization, you pick up fundamentals that then they don't go away. They don't fail you. They actually will. You'll build on them as you get a strong fundamental tool set. Whereas if you just dive in and start building dashboards, from the start, and then somebody comes along and says, "Hey, there's a better way," many of those bad habits that you've already picked up are hard to break.
Yeah.
So it's kind of like getting started with the right approach first, and then that way it serves you well down the line versus getting too far into it and doing things kind of like your way, and maybe your way isn't the way you picked up isn't the best thing, and certainly bad habits are hard to break.
Yeah, I like that idea, especially if they're rookies, right? You want to give them a good foundation to get them to have those good habits. But I'm curious, you said a couple things that seem like they could be tough for people to do. One you said is about sitting down with management and asking them questions, and then this idea of storyboarding. So let me hit this first thing. So like management, I'm a rookie. I'm a newbie to the company or whatever. Maybe even doing analytics for the Browns, what have you. How am I going to go and have that kind of conversation? How do I get the confidence or the skills to go and do that? Because it could be pretty intimidating. And it's not necessarily just because you're young. I see a lot of people who have been somewhere for years and they don't want to challenge management, quote unquote, challenge management.
Yeah, I think that clearly there's a natural rapport that you should try to build with your management, and just say that look, I'm new in my position. I really want to deliver for you what you want. At the end of the day, what's going to help you make a business decision? And I believe that if we go through this process, you'll find that the outcome is better at the end, rather than if we just dive into the visual. So give me a chance to prove it. But if you and I sit down and we have a few enablement sessions, maybe 15 minutes, 30 minutes, to sit down and see what some of the questions are, what some of the answers could be, and how I can lay that out for you, that you'll be better off down the road. So I know I know everyone's busy, but I don't want to have. You may have more time at the end if I have to reconstruct what I've built, because it doesn't answer the questions that you had initially, that you really want to find out. So I think that you should feel comfortable with saying that, and that your boss would probably appreciate that, to say like, yeah, I don't want you to waste my time. I don't want you to produce something that at the end is not going to answer my questions, or is just going to be like a big query box, when actually I really want something that's more focused.
So have you seen, I really like that, because you're being direct, but not in like an obnoxious way, of course, and you're also setting the stage, because you're not just asking questions that don't have, without providing some background as to why you might be asking those questions. Now imagine after you do this enough times, maybe you don't have to go through that preamble, unless people forget, and you have to say, hey, hold on a second, remember where we talked about this, and it worked out really well last time. So I'm assuming you've seen that work for you and other people to approach it that way.
Yeah. So when I sat down with one of our senior leaders, after I finished going through the whole process, and there was a couple iterations of going back and forth and designing this, he said, how do I get all my people on my teams to adopt this? So it just became like a way to really get at what was important. I think it also served me well during the COVID period, because we weren't able to be face to face and sit down across the table from somebody and say like, here's what I've developed for you. But even to have the thought processes involved, like what are my business questions? What am I trying to answer? And we were able to have a virtual session. This was on the whole idea of which stores should we open first, and the prioritization of stores. Have like a virtual session where it wasn't really like a storyboard on paper. And I'll just say that, I would normally do that, but it's like, what would help you answer the questions that you need to answer to open the stores? We provided sort of like a skeleton or a framework that we didn't have a whole lot of time invested in. And then we got a whole bunch of feedback, and the collaboration virtually worked really well as well. But then we were able to produce this dashboard that we were able to give to our HR and operations teams, so they can get the ball rolling on prioritizing stores, not just on the basis of sales, but on the basis of where we think they're going to be successful and where it's safe to open.
Wow. And you have like thousands of stores, right?
Right.
It's a big number. So it's a lot that goes into that.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah, that's pretty cool. So it sounds like where a lot, and I've seen this, but it's good to hear your experience, where a lot of times people say, oh, that's just going to take more time, and it's going to slow us down. It almost sounds the opposite, that you found it. Maybe you didn't have to do as much rework, and actually it was easier to get to the finish line because you had a clearer path, and you were able, everybody was able to kind of be aligned early on, rather than, doesn't mean you don't have to iterate, because you're still probably going to. You mentioned iterating before, but the iterations are more focused rather than people say iterate. It means someone coming back going, yeah, that's just totally wrong. Do it again, which is not the kind of iteration you want to do, right?
Yeah. Yeah. And those are the kinds of things we've seen. I've seen it myself in some of the dashboards I've produced. Well, I get what you did here, but it's not really what I want to, it doesn't really answer what I want. Or I've seen happen to other people where somebody would ask for a dashboard, they'd be finished with it, and then their leadership would say, start over, do something different, and a lot of time wasted there. But some of that was the trial and error, and us just like kind of starting with it within our own department, and really just trying to work with a few books that we had read and those kind of things. Yeah.
Yeah, I think any change that you can do, it always starts with you, and then, like you said, instead of doing a top down, a lot of times you have to do, maybe it's not bottoms up, but it's like middle up and middle down, right? Because you guys are kind of in the middle of things too, right? The way your organization is. So, and it goes back to even one of the first thing you said, and I'll kind of close it out with this, is when you said you were showing people other ideas, right? And it kind of that was just more like, oh, here's another visual we could do, or maybe we wanted, this is a good direction for us. I think you've just shown different ways that you can be a leader in this area, right? You can lead by showing other work. You can lead by doing. You can lead by trying new ideas, right? You can lead by taking chances sometimes, right? We work with a lot of unknowns in the world of data. It's not buttoned up, right? It's a little bit looser than a lot of other organizations are, because there's just so much going on, with changing of information and how much you have, and where, like, for you guys, you have so many different factors. Like you said, you never really were sure what was going on, but you did get eventually convinced that it was going up, and you didn't figure out why. And maybe someday you'll go back and you'll try to dissect why that happened, because maybe there's something in there you could use, right? And if you knew what those causes were, potentially you could experiment. So anything you want to close with? Because I think we're at about our 30-minute mark, and I want to wrap up and be fair to our listeners.
Well, I think that with this, things change quite a bit. With technology, I think that anyone would do well to continue to learn best practices, whether it's best practices in visualization or data management, or these kind of things. Always be looking for the newest way to do things, and I guess the point is continue to upskill, right? Yeah. Don't rest on your laurels. Maybe what used to be acceptable like 3 years ago today would seem outdated. So just continue to learn the best that you can, and then be objective. Let the data tell the story. Don't tell the story and then try to fit the data to your story.
Yeah, those points I think those are great advice for people that are new to the field, and for people that have been working for a long time in it. You can always learn. You can always get better. So I appreciate your closing down with that. So Gary, great to see you as always. Great to talk to you as always. Thanks so much for your time, and we're going to close out.
All right. Thank you very much.
So long, everybody.